Well, good morning from the West Coast. I'm Weston LaBar. I'm the CEO of the Harbor Trucking Association, headquartered here in Long Beach, California. I'm joined today by Peter Freidman, representing the Agricultural Transportation Coalition, and Vince Iacopella with the Los Angeles Customs and Freight Forwarders Association. I first want to thank everybody for joining us. This is a major issue that we'll be discussing today that has been plaguing each of our members for the last at least 6 years since I've been in this position, with some major asks and I think some major developments this year alone, but unfortunately we haven't seen a change to the process. The Harbor Trucking Association, as I think many people know, have tried to use an ecosystem approach as we look at how do we solve the problems that plague the West Coast ports. We've had great participation by many of the marine terminal operators. We've had very constructive dialogue with the equipment providers and the pool of pools, and outside of it, obviously we work very closely with the other organizations, the beneficial cargo owners, the brokers and the forwarders, the folks that represent freight. But unfortunately, the ocean carriers have not been coming to the table, and the tables they do come to, they give us very little in the form of constructive feedback and collaboration. I do want to thank Maersk for reaching out following a release that we sent 2 weeks ago from the Harbor Trucking and California Trucking Associations, respectively, asking for carriers to come to the table. And we do appreciate that, and we're hopeful that there's some real dialogue that will come from that, and some collaborations and some solutions that we can implement. But the fact of the matter is the majority of the feedback that we've gotten from ocean carriers on many of these issues, if you look at the interpretive rule passed by the Federal Maritime Commission earlier this year, the response was not, let's come to the table, let's get to work, and let's implement these best practices. It was to increase the amount of the fee that the carriers assess to truckers and to cargo owners in the form of detention. So I first want to say that we are here with open arms. We want to talk about how we fix this moving forward, not just the issues that we've had historically, but we do want to work with the ocean carriers, and in the absence of that, we need to pursue other opportunities to fix this problem. The Harbor Trucking Association today, in conjunction with almost 50 other organizations representing the trucking community, importers, exporters, and our intermediaries, the brokers and forwarders, submitted a call to action to the Federal Maritime Commission, asking them to do what they can to, in the short term, immediately suspend detention and demurrage in both Southern California and in the ports of New York, New Jersey, as this is not just a California issue anymore, as well as do what we can to enforce the interpretive rule that was outlined for the ocean carriers earlier this year, so we can have advanced planning, be a better collaborator, and work with our partners to mitigate these issues that we have, I might add, almost every year in the 6 years that I've been the CEO of the Harbor Trucking Association. In 6 years, I've lived through 5 once-in-a-lifetime issues, including a labor issue, including a bankruptcy of an ocean carrier, including a cargo surge, including our supply chain being shut down because of COVID and now bursting at the seams because of COVID. We have the same issues every time, and unfortunately, we have yet to fix them in a meaningful way. Our big issue from the trucking perspective is the detention. It's the inability to return empty containers. It's the inability to free up equipment to pick up import volume. And it's the inability, because of the construct of both the appointment systems for empty returns, as well as the lack of available space on dock because of the inability of the ocean carriers to load back empty containers to vessels, for our members to terminate their empties. The only thing that I can think of that would be equivalent would be renting a car from Enterprise Rental Car, knowing that you're supposed to return it today on Monday, but being told there's no slots available in the parking lot. You'll have to wait until Wednesday or Thursday if appointments open up. However, we're going to have to keep charging you for the use of that rental car because it's not returned to the possession of the rental car company. That's just unsuitable in any other industry. It's unsuitable in this industry. And for once, I think that people realize that we need a more equitable way to manage this. These detention issues have resulted in well over $100 million in unreasonable detention and demurrage to truckers, shippers alike. Something that is not supposed to be meant for revenue. However, these fees meant to incentivize the fluid movement of cargo are being assessed by those that are locking up our supply chain most. All we ask for is the ability to pick up and drop off containers or to work with us in a reasonable way when we can't do that through no fault of our own. We've seen the detention issues we've been dealing with all year bleed over onto the demurrage side because of a complete lack of chassis and the inability to return those empties or do dual transactions to free up that equipment, spilling over into what we would consider unreasonable demurrage charges. And the fact of the matter is, through the entire process, the ocean carrier points the finger at the marine terminal and says they're the reason that we can't return the empty equipment, or in many instances, the marine terminal will point to the ocean carrier and talk about their role in obstructing the return or pickup of cargo. And to talk about demurrage and the impact this is having on America's exporters, our farmers, the folks that are actually growing the food we eat, I want to hand it over to my good friend, Peter Freidman with the AgTC. Peter.
Thank you very much. Weston, thank you and the Harbor Trucking Association for organizing this gathering. We've been working together for many years, and I'm feeling that we're on the cusp of some real progress now. You know, it was years ago when one of the largest almond exporters out of California, a member of the Agriculture Transportation Coalition, at one of our workshops, slammed her fist to the table and says, by God, I want the truckers to be members of the AgTC because the truckers are the only ones who actually know what's happening at the marine terminals and will actually tell us the truth of how long they're waiting, how much it's costing, and so forth. So ever since then, we have had truckers from around the country, drayage operators, drayage truckers such as Weston's representing, as well as the long haul truckers, the biggest trucking companies in the United States. So because the supply chain, if you got it, a truck brought it. And for all our agriculture exporters and many of our importers too, we need to collaborate. Now, demurrage and detention. What's the problem? The problem is when you have those charges, they are an indication that the supply chain is not working. Those are supposedly penalties for failure to perform, to comply with regular commercial practices. As Weston said, when you can't return a container, you shouldn't be charged for that use of that container. The same for demurrage. Now, demurrage charges, that is for the rental of storage space really on the terminal, are massive. We have many of our members have hundreds of thousands of dollars of these demurrage charges, and most of our members who are watching are saying you've understated it. We have some members that have $15 to $20 million of outstanding demurrage charges that they're dealing with. Now, why is this of such concern to the U.S. agriculture community? Because the fact is, there's nothing we produce in agriculture here in the United States or in forest products that we grow, we farm, we process, we manufacture, nothing that cannot be sourced somewhere else in the world. If we can't deliver affordably, dependably to our foreign customer, guess what? That foreign customer will go somewhere else in the world and get the supply they need. Whether it's soybeans that people should be buying from the northern Midwest, which are the best quality in the world, but if they can't get them, if it become too expensive because our supply chain breaks down, as it is breaking down now, as indicated by all these demurrage and detention charges, they'll go to Brazil. Hey, you can get forage from Argentina, from Australia, and other locations. So Bottom line is demurrage charges are out of control. They are costing collectively tens of millions of dollars. That is being on the back of agriculture exporters who are shipping relatively low margin, high volume cargo that again is limited in what the customer will pay for it because the customer has plenty of options as to where to source it. So guidelines were issued by the Federal Maritime Commission, and we were very pleased to see the commission taking action, recognizing it after years of Commissioner Dye, studying the supply chain, working with Weston's group and others all over the country to promulgate guidelines. We have been disappointed the guidelines have not been implemented and followed since then. I think we are sensing that there is a renewed desire at the Federal Maritime Commission to address the supply chain dysfunction. We believe, we hope that the commission will move forward in meaningful, tangible ways. As Weston had recommended, waiving demurrage and detention at the ports. Also, we believe that the demurrage charges should not come about just without any reason, without any justification. So we believe the FMC should convert these guidelines to an enforceable rule, while the FMC Enforcement Bureau would enforce those guidelines and not make it optional. Because what the FMC actually said is that reasonable practices are not optional. They gave some guidelines to the carriers and terminals as to what are reasonable practices. But the carriers and terminals did not engage in those specific measures that were set forth in the guideline or any others. They had the choice, but they didn't. Reasonable practices are not optional. And I hope the Federal Maritime Commission will engage based upon communications now coming from the importers, exporters, from all parts of the country, truckers, all persons, freight forwarders and customs brokers, to actually make these guidelines meaningful, enforceable, reasonable practices so we can get our supply chain working again, because these demurrage charges are rendering U.S. agriculture non-competitive in a number of areas. Once we lose those foreign markets, we don't get them back easily. We have almond growers who 12 years ago lost customers in Japan and are still trying to get them back. We have hay exporters who lost the Japanese market for cattle 7 years ago. And now Japan is sourcing from Argentina. This goes to the heart of the U.S. export competitiveness, and it's got to be addressed. So to provide a little more focus on the impact of these demurrage charges, detention charges, to the trade community globally, nationally, importers as well, is Vince Iacopella, the representing the Los Angeles Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association and chairman of the Pacific Coast Council of Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders. Thank you, Vince, for coming. Thank you, Weston, for organizing.
Thank you, Weston and Peter. Well, first, I have to thank Weston for the leadership he's shown, and Peter as well, on this issue very early on, before it was getting so much press, before it was costing the amounts of money that it's costing now. A couple of things. Demurrage and detention. So we're basically customs brokers, freight forwarders, and along with Weston's members, basically very little moves off the ocean terminal without our direct involvement and our direct instruction. And we've been discussing this, like many people on the ground, touching the best beneficial cargo owner, touching the ocean terminal. Many people, we were seeing this a little bit before it started getting some noise in the press. We noticed that the demurrage and detention was creeping up. But basically, it's common sense and as Peter mentioned, rationale. If I only have a set amount of free time and I can't get an appointment within that set free time from the terminal, and I come in after that free time has expired, it's just, you don't have to be an expert to say, maybe I shouldn't be charged demurrage on that, since I could not get that container and equipment during the allotted free time. So maybe 4 or 5 months ago, it was an annoyance, but I will use, we have many, many examples of companies that were unable to get an appointment within the allotted time, or their trucker was not able to get an appointment during the allotted time. And that basically has been the pushback of many of the ocean terminals. Well, you really have this amount of time to get an appointment. And one distinction on the extension of free time, the Port of Long Beach has always had in their tariff exceptions for certain types of customs holds on the terminal that would extend the free time, not every type. The Port of Los Angeles had never had that in their tariff, which would be an extension for a container that was on a FDA hold or a customs hold. So that has all been exacerbated in this environment. And we're really faced with no choice at all, because as Weston's members can tell you, if we do not pay the demurrage, we cannot get the container off the pier. So we're frequently in discussions with customers as to, well, if you think the data is wrong, we can always go back after the fact. If you think something is a little off, we can always go back after the fact. But we absolutely need to pay the demurrage now to get that container now. So if I go back to the feedback we were getting from beneficial cargo owners in the very beginning, there were issues with the appointment system. It was well-meaning, but we were having issues getting appointments. Some of our larger customers who had written extended free time into their contracts were getting the extended free time. We've also noticed that some customers, including our own company, if you request the free time at the time of booking at origin, you may get it, or you may not get it. It's kind of a hit or miss. So we've been wrestling with this since June, but it's cute last month. And our PCC president, Lalo Acosta, have a Tuesday call that was supposed to be a pandemic call, but we literally, this is the #1 subject facing brokers, forwarders, our customers. So what's changed in the last month that's a little bit alarming to me? We have one customer in the Northeast who is using a couple of different forwarders. They were using some forwarder contracts, ocean contracts, some of their own ocean contracts. And in the month of August, they dispersed over $200,000 in demurrage. This is during COVID, and margins are already taxed. They're already lower than what they should be. And ironically, this was August and September were like the first months where purchase orders were starting to reach levels that were pre-COVID. So they were very excited about the activity, and literally, and I do have I've spoken to them recently, literally demurrage and detention has almost wiped out the third quarter margins for this company during COVID. Demurrage and detention is something that is not budgeted. It's not something they sit down at the beginning of the year and say, this is what we're going to pay X amount of dollars for demurrage and detention. So almost everything that comes out of demurrage and detention comes right out of the bottom line. So while all this talk about stimulus and are we getting stimulus, or are we not getting stimulus, and then we have these deep systemic issues in the port that are adding tremendous cost to the value for U.S. resellers that basically can't be recouped. So we welcome Western's efforts, Peter's efforts, the efforts by certain FMC commissioners. Look, the port authorities are our partners. We have great relationships with the port authorities. We're beyond a finger pointing type mentality on this. We're willing to be a stakeholder that wants to be part of the solution. Western HTA wrote a letter that suggested some very specific things that can be done. We realize that it's not a silver bullet. We absolutely see firsthand that the ocean carriers have a tremendous amount of leverage in this case, and that the terminals are somewhat limited, but we can have a discussion about what their capabilities are. The last thing I'll mention is this. We, as customs brokers in the LA area, probably disperse the largest percentage of demurrage on behalf of someone. So we have a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, lots. And those businesses have the same COVID cash liquidity concerns that larger businesses have. Double whammy here. We end up dispersing a lot of wires, checks up front just to get the container, because that's our job, to get the container for our customers. And we get the added advantage of having to invoice the customer on our invoices huge sums of money. So that invoice comes in, the customer is oftentimes confused. Well, wait a minute, did my trucker not get the allotted, did my trucker not make the appointment during the allotted free time? Is it something my broker did? Even if all those things aren't true, the customs broker is dispersing these funds. It's a pass-through. We're billing these funds. I did a quick KPI. I won't mention the terminal, but I did a quick KPI on 11 containers that stayed in the terminal for 14 days from date of unloading to the time it needed to be loaded to the ramp to go inland. My office in LA spent an average of 11 hours, 10 hours on with the terminal, trying to locate the containers, trying to get a rail loading schedule. So these are all kind of like untalked about costs. I'll leave you with this. I'll finish with this. And Peter and I have talked about this for almost years now, but I'll leave you with this. There's always been, can I go to Prince Rupert? Can I go to Savannah? Can I go to Houston? There's always been that. And one of the biggest anchors of keeping that cargo in Los Angeles has been the post-release community, customs brokers, fulfillment houses, customs attorneys. There's a reason why people, by BCOs, want to use Los Angeles, Long Beach as a port of discharge. The last 2 weeks, we have basically been in discussions with beneficial cargo owners on how we can avoid the port of Long Beach and Los Angeles complex. These are serious discussions, and the company that paid over $200,000 in demurrage is now going all water to Norfolk, Virginia. It's done, the decision's made, they have no interest in coming back. So I'm just grateful to Weston and Peter to give the customs brokers a voice in this. We are on the ground. We are one of the few vendors that talks to the importers and the exporters every day about this issue, about the real costs. So Peter, Weston, thanks for the forum to get our story out.
No, and thank you, Peter and Vince, for recapping. We're going to open it up to Q&A for the media. If you're not part of the media, please refrain from asking a question. You can always reach out to me at weston@harbortrucker.com. And I'm happy to have a conversation. You can reach out to our staff. But we really want to get to the media, be able to answer questions. But I think that what you're hearing is we could have had a much different situation or outlook if we would have just had ocean carriers observe some of the guidelines within the interpretive rule that was initiated earlier this year. If we could have maximized the amount of dual transactions in the harbor, we could have minimized the impacts to the chassis and driver shortage that we're seeing. It's impossible for somebody to get a truck or a chassis in Southern California, and that shouldn't be the situation, but it's because of how inefficient that we are. And a lot of it is dictated by outside controls. So we're hoping that this is a real message to ocean carriers to come to the table and be a partner. Again, we're encouraged by Maersk reaching out very publicly and saying, we want to work with you. Let's solve this issue. But the irony is that we're here. You know, we're part of the ecosystem, the local port community. If the cargo leaves, the folks that are creating the inefficiency, charging the fee, they're going to leave with the cargo and keep the customer, because the ships can sail to any port. Unfortunately, we can't move port authorities or change some of the issues, and should not be paying a penalty for doing business in the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. And with that, we'll open it up to any comment or questions from the media.
Hi, everyone. So we have Bill and John. So first is Bill Mongaluzzo. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You should be able to, it says you're self-muted, so go ahead and unmute your device and we can hear you.
Hello, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, thanks. Weston and Peter, realistically, how quickly can the FMC respond to the request to suspend detention and demurrage?
Well, I think, and I'll let Peter chime in as well. I think what we're asking for is a little unique. I don't think we've been to the point where somebody's had to ask for this level of relief in the past. And we know that any governmental agency has a bureaucratic process and a legal process they need to follow. So we've been meeting with the Federal Maritime Commission. We've actually met with all of the commissioners on the crisis that we're dealing with. And I think uniformly, they're looking at what they can and can't do from a legal powers and authority standpoint. But we're very confident that something can be done, and rather quickly. There could be some sort of an announcement, but we're waiting to see what the FMC legally feels like they can or can't do in this situation. And like I said, I think that they tried to do it earlier this year in a way that wasn't going to over-regulate or create a situation that was overly burdensome to the ocean carrier community. However, they decided not to implement those reasonable business practices as outlined through the Federal Maritime Commission's interpretive rule. And because of that, now we have to look at something a little bit more onerous. None of us from the private sector likes regulation, but when you keep getting pantsed in the schoolyard, sometimes you have nowhere to turn but to your big brother. And that's kind of what we had to do here. So soon, we hope.
Look at there, 2 points. One is ocean carriers have within their capabilities, the ability to reduce some of the pressure here on their customers. Keep in mind, these shippers, it's not adversarial. They are the customers. And in virtually every other business, a service provider really wants to make sure their customer is healthy and happy and not losing money during this COVID period in the ways that Vince described. So one of the things they could do is do an accurate or quasi-accurate earliest return date. Those don't happen. If you don't have an earliest return date, you are guaranteeing somebody who's putting dried milk powder into a train in Junction City, Kansas, that they are going to end up having to pay not only demurrage when it gets to LA Long Beach, but hundreds of thousands of dollars over a period of time in truck storage fee, truck driver storage, chassis rental, finding storage, because you're not going to meet the 2-day window that the carrier gave you, but they didn't give you the accurate earliest return date. So this is a huge problem. Carriers can improve their performance there too. I'm finding, and I'm sure Weston and Vince are too, those ocean carriers that authorize their people on the ground here in the US to make policy decisions, waive, detention, demurrage, whatever, are the carriers that are sincerely trying to find solutions. Other carriers where the decisions are all made at corporate headquarters overseas and they don't empower their domestic people are the ones creating things like communications to our ag exporters right now saying, we're canceling all your bookings, Trans-Pacific, and we're not taking any more of your bookings through the end of the year. What does that do to you if you're an ag exporter and this is your high shipping season? Or you have 300 container allocation with us a month. We're reducing it to 4 containers. What does that do to US competitiveness? And that's in the Central Valley of California, much less nationwide. Now, in terms of FMC, many of these decisions ocean carriers make are subject to the agreements that they have filed at the Commission as required by the Shipping Act of '84 and the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 1998. The FMC has the ability to go in and challenge any filed agreement under Section 6G. They can challenge. Now, the FMC has been terrific since 1984 in finding reasons they can't or won't challenge. Since then, there have been thousands of agreements filed between carriers, terminal operators, port authorities, and only once was a challenge and it quickly dropped. Is that enforcement or not? Commission has the authority. They can use it. It's not a question of whether they have the authority, Bill, under the Shipping Act. It's whether they have the will. And we're encouraged by recent conversations, I think all 3 of us have had, that there is increased will at the Commission to use the tools that are available, and they are available.
Thank you.
The official position, Bill, of the World Shipping Council on behalf of the ocean carriers was that the FMC did not have the authority to even promulgate the rule with the guidelines. That's their position. They don't have the authority. They can't do it. But thank goodness we had leadership at the Commission and they went ahead and did what the Shipping Act allows them to do. Now we're asking them to take the next step.
Yeah. And Bill, I think it also, it's good to point out that the Shipping Act has not been changed in almost 30 years, right? 1984 is a long time ago, and the way that this industry operates is fundamentally different. No longer does the blue container come on the blue ship into the blue terminal onto a blue chassis, and you know you're going to be able to return said blue container and blue chassis back to that terminal when you pick up the next one. It's an Easter egg hunt. In 1984, we didn't have appointment systems. So when a container came off a ship, it was technically available. And our members had typically, especially after the advent of Pure Pass, we had 8 opportunities, 4 days with a day shift and a night shift, to be able to get that container out under the random access model. Today, you're lucky if you get 2. In many cases, you probably get 1. And in times like these, you may not get an opportunity within the free time. So fundamentally, not only does the FMC have tools at their disposal that we do think that they will use, we hope that they will use, but it's time to look at the Shipping Act and have it accurately regulate our industry and provide those guidelines through Congress. The way that we move goods. It's not beneficial to anybody to have a set of guidelines that fundamentally create inefficiencies and allow folks to profiteer from them. And that's part of the problem. Just, I want to echo this. I have conversations with local people domestically for these foreign-owned ocean carriers. In general, they're good people. In general, you speak with them and they'll say, yes, you're right. But when I submit this to my home office overseas, they tell me they cannot extend last free day or they cannot help with that situation. I think that there is a list of canned answers because I am on a lot of the responses that just say, we do not extend last free time for lack of an appointments at the terminal that we're telling you to take the container back to, or the terminal that we have imported the box into. That's a problem. This is not covered in the Shipping Act. It needs to be covered in the Shipping Act. And when we talk to these folks locally, they understand the plight that we deal with, And that's the telling thing. When somebody says, sorry, I know that you should get an extension of free time because you were stuck in line or there's no appointments, but somebody overseas says, no, we're not going to let that happen. That's the problem.
Here's a little bit of the shot across the bow, which I think the carriers should pay attention to. They should, as Weston was saying, empower the people on the ground here in the US. Don't send us some canned edict that comes from another continent. 2, the last times the ocean carriers were united in opposition to something that the shippers, importers, exporters were united in seeking, the carriers had their hat handed to them, or their heads. Verified gross mass, VGM. Why did the carriers oppose what their customers, the importers and exporters, were seeking? The ocean carriers overseas made a policy there should be verified gross mass certification at all export ports. The US opposed that. US interests, exporters and importers opposed it. And guess what? VGM is not applied here at US ports. Back in 1984, the ocean carriers opposed the establishment of shippers associations. Now, why would you do that? But they did. And guess what? We do have shippers associations, powerful ones in the Agriculture Transportation Coalition and all over. So the fact is, when push comes to shove, I think members of Congress are going to listen to their constituents, trucking companies, customs brokers, freight forwarders, agriculture producers, so forth. And I think that behooves ocean carriers to pay attention to what they can do to resolve this issue and not simply be adversarial. I'm having a conversation with the president, global president of a steamship line coming up this week or next week to see if I can convey that, because I think there's a way to get a resolution on some of these things, but the decisions have got to be made recognizing domestic US commercial interests.
Absolutely. Eric, do we have another question?
Yes, we have John Kingston from FreightWaves, followed by Scott Case of Position Global. John, you are now unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Question on the Maersk. You were very praiseworthy for the steps Maersk have taken. Have you gotten decidedly negative reaction from other shippers, or is Maersk just out there hoping to take the lead? And have you heard from anybody who said, I don't care what Maersk says, we're going to do what we want to do, and we're going to continue with our policies?
So John, thank you for that question. I think it tells you a lot when you are just excited that somebody says they want to work with you. For 6 years, we've been saying we want to work with folks. And the fact that the biggest win we have so far is a carrier saying, yes, we want to work with you. We have a meeting set up later this week with our productivity committee and our leadership and their North American leadership to discuss some of these issues. But by and large, we get no response. And that's part of the issue, is they don't feel like they need to come to the table and work with us. When we're in some of the many task forces that we sit on, they either say nothing or very little, and nothing that warrants what I would call valuable input to solve the problems. That's a problem. And so it's not so much that we've gotten negative feedback, it's that we have gotten no feedback. And prior to sending out our release, we met with several ocean carriers, domestic heads, on this issue of, can we get 48 hours advance notice of where an empty needs to go so we can book a dual transaction and get a guaranteed empty? For those of you who don't know, the way it works today is that you have to make an appointment on an empty container to return it. The appointments may open up 3 to 5 days before you return that empty container, but you don't know where you'll be able to return it until 4 p.m. the day before your appointment, which may not be where your appointment is. So truckers are forced, or whoever's securing the appointment, they're forced to make appointments at multiple facilities to try to have maximum flexibility to actually get that container back, which means you have an artificial shortage of appointments on the empty side because everybody is trying to gobble up those appointments so they don't get stuck with these detention bills. And then Now, with the inability of the ocean carriers to load back their empty containers, I talk to terminals that tell me they have 10 to 15,000 empty containers sitting on their docks every day that they can't get loaded back on ships, which apparently every place else in the world. My members in Oakland, they need containers to load exports to send them out, I guess assuming that they can put them on a vessel and that they're not stuck here in the United States contributing to our massive trade deficit. Peter's got members all over the country looking to for containers to put their soybeans or their rawhide or pick the agricultural product, frozen meat. They cannot get those containers. You know why? They're all sitting on terminals in Los Angeles and Long Beach, or they're sitting in my yards of my members in the greater Southern California community. That's a problem. And the fact is that we asked for something reasonable, 1 extra day of advance notification so we could do all the logistics to make their job easier. When we met with them the first time, there was 3 carriers. They said, yeah, that seems easy. We do that already, or we should be able to do that. A week later, after speaking with folks in their headquarters overseas, they said, systems don't work that way. It's absolutely impossible to give you more than 24 hours notice of where an empty container needs to go. It's unacceptable in the digital era. It's unacceptable. It flies in the face of what the Port of Los Angeles has tried to do with the Port Optimizer. It flies in the face of what we're all trying to do, integrating systems, sharing data. So, John, again, to answer your question, it's not that we've received negative feedback. It's that we're so low on the logistics totem pole, apparently, that we don't warrant a feedback. And that's why we're appreciative of what Maersk did, because not only did they call me and say that they want to work together, they told the world that they want to work with us. And that's a step in the right direction.
Hey, Weston, if I could add one thing. There seems to be a new twist on that story. I was on the phone with our Hong Kong office Friday evening, and very interesting. Several carriers will be coming out with a repositioning surcharge on containers that are leaving China, coming to the United States. They really haven't fleshed out what this is going to mean. I won't say the amount, but it's substantial. So because this is a systemic problem, it is not just going to be contained to ocean carriers and Los Angeles and Long Beach for now. This thing is pervasive. It's going to spread. So now, according to what I've learned, very soon, maybe in 10 days in China, you will be given an option to book with the surcharge leaving China or without. And if you book with this surcharge, your SI cutoff in China of you making that vessel is much better than the booking that does not have the surcharge, right? So this is getting very interesting, and I agree with you. Maybe those carriers that are have not started a dialogue with you or have been silent, as practices in other parts of the world at the origin start changing. And by the way, this is another fee. This is a surcharge fee just for the privilege of booking a container from Shenzhen to Los Angeles, because it is a privilege now, apparently. You have to pay this fee. And if you don't want to pay this fee, they don't know if you're going to get on that vessel. You're actually paying for the repositioning of some of these containers at origin in Asia. So things are moving very quickly with the ocean carriers. And I agree with you. I commend Maersk, and I agree with you that as this becomes more pervasive, perhaps others can come to the table.
Well, and since they're being investigated in South Korea as well, because of the same types of practices that are negatively impacting South Korea's exporter community, this is not the only effort going on worldwide. Maybe we'll see more governments weigh into this, because it seems like there's a lot of losers and one winner.
It's no question. China.
Could I do a follow-up question?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Follow-up question. Well, the obvious question is, which is, what is their motivation for this? And that's to continue to collect demurrage and detention charges. But as you've noted, this situation didn't just start now; it got really worse now. But you still had this problem a while ago. So why are they so resistant? What do they? I can't believe that they are just doing this just to collect demurrage and detention fees.
I don't think there's I don't know what the downside is for them. I think that it was really summarized best when Peter said, these are fees that are supposed to be collected when things are inefficient. So if we're collecting so many fees, everything must be broken. And I will tell you, in 2014-15, when we dealt with some of the protracted labor negotiation issues, we had members go out of business. They did not have the cash flow to pay the lofty detention and demurrage bills. They did not get the relief they needed. They were unable to make an agreement with the carriers and thus got locked out of doing business in the harbor. And in some cases, again, through no fault of their own, the inability to return something, but the charge. And that's the problem, is that there's no oversight that holds the ocean carriers responsible. They are the judge, they are the jury, and they are the executioner in many instances. And what does that mean? I'm going to tell you to return that container to Terminal A. Terminal A is out of appointments. That's not my fault. Pay me. It's easier for the ocean carrier to make the rest of the supply chain work harder to overcome the inefficiencies that the alliance model has created for the broader supply chain than it is to work with the landside logistics partners and the cargo owners to say, we reaped the benefit of efficiencies based on these alliances on the water side. How can we work with you to make sure it doesn't impact you negatively on the land side? That's never happened, and it's never gonna happen unless we have some sort of leverage that holds them accountable. And that's what we've been missing. And that's what I think the interpretive rule was. The first thing we really saw was an opportunity to create guidelines and hold people accountable. And that's all we're asking for. We're asking for equity. We don't think we should have it any easier than the ocean carrier, but we don't think that we should have terms dictated to us by another party, and we should be treated by, punny here, the redheaded stepchild of the industry, just because it makes it easier for them.
And I would say that another element, both China and Korea have demonstrated that their governments will step in to help their exporters and assure their exporters stay viable in the global marketplace. We're asking the Federal Maritime Commission to do so, and not by studying it, monitoring it, and reporting back in a year on what their data shows. We know what it shows. Number two, we have had reasonably mid-level people in this country.
Peter, you went mute.
Okay, I'm sorry. We have had China, Korea have both demonstrated that their governments will step in to protect their exporters. The United States needs to as well, not in the traditional FMC method of embarking on a study that's multi-year, where we have a lot of data and so forth. It needs to be prompt, immediate, such as China and South Korea have done. Two, we have some mid-level folks with some of the ocean carriers who over the course of the last year or two have indicated that at the beginning of the budget year for the ocean carriers, when they're budgeting their freight revenue, they calculate a really significant percentage of their total freight revenue to be coming from detention charges and demurrage charges. It has become a base revenue item. How can that be a base revenue item when it's only charged when you have things not working right? How can that be baked into the system? That has to be addressed. And three, I think the carriers overseas need to empower their people domestically, and they need to pay attention to the Federal Maritime Commission, and they should not pay attention, frankly, to their lawyers who are always advising them how to fight the best for themselves for the financial short term, but those lawyers never advise the ocean carriers what's the best you can do for your long-term relationship with your customers. And I think the ocean carriers need to pivot on that point.
Great comments. I just want to reassure everybody that we'll continue to take questions from the media. I know personally I'll stay here as long as needed. I'll open it up to other questions after we finish the media. I know that we've had some folks reach out, and I'll stay on it as long as need be. But I think that the biggest thing you're hearing, John, is that people should make money for moving cargo. People shouldn't make money when cargo doesn't move. That's the big message. Eric, who's next question?
So next up, we have Scott Case from Position Global, and then I see Bill Mongaluzzo from Journal of Commerce. So Scott, you should be able to speak now.
Thank you very much. Hi, Peter. Hi, Vince. Weston, a pleasure to meet you. A two-part question. Peter and Vince, both of your audiences that you have cut across large swaths of industries. And I would say that from a trade press point of view, we're definitely getting coverage within the wider impacted community. Have either of you been able to identify an inflection point that gets this out in just sort of the wider media audience to be able to just sort of use that power? And then as a part two question, Peter, this is for you, and I guess for Vince as well, just because of the PCC connection. This would obviously cut across a multiple number of different congressional committees who would have jurisdiction of this outside of the individual members who are impacted. Have you been able to identify a committee that could write for this? Or looking ahead to the transition committees that have been named, is there anybody on a relevant transition committee with the incoming administration that would be an audience for this as well? Obviously, that doesn't solve things now, but certainly in, say, Q1, if there's an identified sympathetic ear to be able to speak to this, that we could start to raise the issue, or the issue rather can be raised with the administration at a national level versus just the Federal Maritime Commission level, where it seems to be just compartmentalized for the moment.
If I could just weigh in quickly. So the answer is yes. We have been meeting with key members of key committees in both the House and the Senate. I think we were all waiting to see what happened with the election and to see where things went from a standpoint of who was going to be in the majorities. But we've got a better idea of where that'll be today. Maybe not a glass, or I should say a crystal ball, but we do have a little bit of an idea. But we have been talking about the fact that these charges have been going on, like I said, at least the 6 years that I've been here. It's American companies, it's truckers, it's farmers, it's importers, it's exporters that are being hurt. It is foreign-owned agency or companies that are levying these fees, and in some cases state-owned by countries that we have a trade war going on with. We've got a $60 billion worth of tariff money that we've collected. That's all been redistributed in the form of aid to farmers, and now they can't export their products to their key markets because these same foreign-owned ocean carriers won't allow them to export to other markets. And I think people understand that this is an American initiative that we need to oversee to protect the American company, but also the trickle-down effect, which is the American consumer, who ultimately will bear the brunt of any increased cost. When Vince talks about a customer of his who's seen their entire quarter of revenue eaten away by these unreasonable charges, what do we see? We will see a trickle-down effect that will make them increase their cost of doing business or augment their workforce that will negatively, again, impact American citizens. So this is what we're looking at. I think we wanted to do more this year. COVID got in the way of a huge intermodal industry hill day that we wanted to perform. But hopefully going into next year, we'll get the virus under control. The efforts that we've had with the Federal Maritime Commission outlining the issue at hand will give us the springboard we need to better educate and work with Congress as a whole. And hopefully we'll get to some resolution to open up the Shipping Act and modernize it, which I believe there is a willingness to do right now.
We have had all great points. One, to specifically, I've looked at the Department of Transportation and basically the transportation landing team, which is a transition team. Nobody immediate stands out. However, I think what I think people need to recognize, this is not a port issue only. It's not an issue that only impacts and is of interest to members of Congress representing ports in their district. And I'll take you back to the verified gross mass. I mean, you would think that would be simply a marine terminal issue because it had to do with submitting the accurate weight of an ocean carrier to the ocean carrier's own, the owner of that ocean carrier's ridiculous notion. You would have to tell Federal Express when you're shipping a package how much its truck weighs. Federal Express truck weighs. It's a stupid idea. But So we took it up to the Hill. And guess who the senators were who really weighed in? A senator from South Dakota, another senator from North Dakota, a senator from Kansas, one from Nebraska, one from Oregon. Those were the senators that really controlled the discussion, and at the end convinced the Federal Maritime Commission to develop a spine and actually stand up to the thing, and brought the US Coast Guard in, and the Coast Guard killed it. The point is, this is a national issue, that the people weighing in and will control the debate are not necessarily those that are your traditional maritime community members of Congress. Those are the people that are going to have an impact. The Wall Street Journal did a story today, this morning, on this issue. They don't do stories that are just confined to a few congressional districts in a few ports. It's a national story. And I think, again, ocean carriers ought to get serious about addressing their customers' needs. Otherwise, you get a government-imposed solution, and that's not always the best solution.
Yeah, if I could add 2 points. Number one, those of us in Los Angeles that were on the ground, if you look at every strategic report from May, April, even March, when everybody was gaming, what is COVID doing to California exporters? What is COVID doing to California importers? Port congestion, demurrage and detention was listed back then. People saw that it was happening back then. But when we had the personal protection equipment, most of which was subject to EPA or FDA, those containers sat on the pier 20 days, 30 days. So we got a little bit of a taste of it, but the story was, well, that's only limited to personal protection equipment because those are tied to other government agencies. And, we don't know definitively that that's going to be a systemic problem into the summer and into the spring. Now, the ports gave outlooks back in April that predicted the congestion. What wasn't predicted is that we were going to get charged demurrage if we couldn't get an appointment during the free time. The other point I'd like to make, and not complaining, I think LA is one of the best places to be in the world. Los Angeles customs brokers and truckers will bear the brunt of this for a couple of reasons. And I'll put all my cards on the table. If we move 400 containers from Los Angeles to Vancouver, and Vancouver is the port of entry, and we do the last mile distribution and we distribute it on, in some cases, our company might make more money than if we kept it in Los Angeles. So what is this push to keep so many things in Los Angeles? Peter pointed out to me a week ago, we have the highest concentration of customs brokers. Most global customs brokers send their best people globally to Los Angeles because it's a gateway, because so much cargo is moving through it. So in the short term, our short-term strategic decision is easy. We're going to ship to another port, and we're going to avoid this mess. The long-term ramifications, which is why there has to be more of more stakeholder buy-in, more of a systemic effort. The long-term is that if we continue to route cargo away from LA Long Beach, and what's keeping BCOs here are the after-release, last-mile expertise. How long will that really last? And as an Angelino, and my employees live in Los Angeles or LA County, how long can we keep LA as a gateway and a hub? I know all about the capacity arguments. Nobody could absorb the capacity. We have the most capacity. I agree with all of that. But there is a trend here where if you want to keep the infrastructure here in Los Angeles, we're going to have to do a much harder job of making it more competitive.
Well, and there's something that I think everybody listening ought to know or be reminded of. Even if you have a customs broker who enjoys the fine weather of Southern California better than the rainy weather of British Columbia, because of remote entry filing, customs allows a customs broker located anywhere in the United States to facilitate the import transaction anywhere else in the United States. So then you will maybe have a lot of brokers still enjoying the sunny Southern California weather, but that cargo, they can definitely route through Canada, Montreal, Halifax, Savannah, Charleston, Houston, Prince Rupert into the United States under current customs laws and protocols. So that's another reason to resolve this issue so that that cargo doesn't move away.
Yeah, and I'd also add as part of your question, it was just announced that Phil Washington, CEO of LA Metro, was named the transportation member of the Biden-Harris transition team. Assuming apparently there's some consternation over election results in the nation, but assuming that President-elect Biden's results hold up, which I think is probably a good bet. But anyway, Phil Washington's a local guy. He understands Los Angeles. We have folks that are being been named to the short list for cabinet positions and for other key advisory roles. These are the folks that we're going to tap into, and in many cases, we won't have to educate them as much on these issues because they know how it impacts our local communities, not just the ports, but the inland infrastructure. It has impacts on our neighborhoods when we don't have a fluid port complex. And again, I think that's the big thing. I don't want the takeaway to be move your containers elsewhere. That's the last thing I want. I want stakeholders who have the least to lose by that cargo moving to come to the table and help our local port communities, our ecosystem, function the way we all know it can, with a little bit of data and a little bit of a commitment and some collaboration. So Eric, I want to get to the next question. So I think Bill was next in line, and then we'll see who else we have.
Yep, Bill, and then I have some questions that came in via writing. Bill, you are now unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Real quickly, all three of you, each of whom represents an organization, are you willing to commit next year to bring a request to Washington to reopen and modernize the Shipping Act?
I'm committed to doing that as long as we have our coalition partners. Bill, I think we wanted to do it this year, but again, COVID kind of got in the way. That was the theme of 2020, was things just didn't go as you planned them. But this is why we're getting everything geared up and ready to go. We want to hear from carriers that they want to be part of the solution process. We want to hear from terminals that they want to be part of the solution process. Status quo won't work anymore. And from the Harbor Trucking Association's perspective, we would be happy to dive into the Shipping Act and do what we need to create an equitable playing field.
Bill, my answer is, as the one who wrote one of those Shipping Acts, the Shipping Act, even though it was written at a time when we had 21 east-west ocean carriers and not the much fewer, half of that today, arrayed on 3 alliances, which could be arguably considered 3 carriers, that's all. The Shipping Act, even though outdated in that respect, provides the tool to the Federal Maritime Commission and to the ocean carriers to address the problems. If the harbor truckers, if the agriculture exporters, if all of its import customers are not feeling aggrieved, they're not going to invest, and we're not going to invest the time and effort to convince Congress to change something which seems to be working. It doesn't seem to be working now, but that has largely been the choice of the carriers and the terminal operators. Why the hell they opposed our efforts to limit VGM? Why the heck do they budget as part of their freight revenue for a year demurrage and detention charges? Why do they not provide an accurate ERD? My God, the airlines, every time you go to an airport, you're Your phone is buzzing every time there's a 2-minute delay in the plane leaving, or they move to the gate immediate adjoining. They tell you instantly. You and thousands of other passengers every minute are getting updates. Why don't the ocean carriers invest in the technology to do that? If they don't, they will motivate their customers to go and seek solutions. And the customers are indeed the constituents of members of Congress. So the carriers, so the answer is, if it continues to the way it's going, there's no choice. The carriers and terminals provide no alternative but to go and change the law and have the government intervene. Personally, I'd rather the carriers resolve the problems themselves, because when the government intervenes, you don't always get the intended consequences. They may not like, the carriers may not like what happens, nor would we.
Yeah, Bill, I would just add, my answer is going to be very easy since Peter's our chief counsel. He already answered on our behalf. I think there are some freight forwarders who, in our trips to DC, have picked very isolated parts of the Shipping Act that they like, right? Very narrow parts of it. By far, in my opinion, this is the most pervasive issue. This is the biggest issue. To Peter's point, if it can be resolved in a different way, that would be great. But if it forced a reopening of the Shipping Act, there would be a discussion about that. But when you're, Peter's point, when you reopen something, you don't know what else you're going to get, right? So, but by far, if that's what it took to fix this issue, just the financial cost, the pervasiveness of it, I think you really need to do whatever it takes.
And if you go to the Hill, having worked on the Hill, you'd much rather be a constituent living in and working in somebody's congressional district or state, such as the truckers, such as agriculture exporters, such as customs workers, than be somebody where the headquarters are on another continent and all decisions are being made on that other continent. Enough said. I think the people who represent carriers here in DC should be painfully aware of that, which is why they've lost.
Eric, do we have another question?
Yes, this one came written in. Are there any resources available for businesses where they can show evidence data regarding these issues? And the thought being is this will help small businesses with their negotiations regarding loans and the terms and cash flows.
Well, we encourage our members to keep track of this data. I know that the HTA accepted anonymous information from our members on the amount of per diem and demurrage, or detention and demurrage, I should say, that was collected, the amount that was disputed, and the amount that was actually paid. We think everybody should be looking at that, but that's how we know that the numbers are over $100 million. You should be taking a look at the process in general is very difficult. It's onerous and it's administratively burdensome. But we have noticed there's a few things that you should be doing. A, keep all of your records. Make sure that you're getting answers in writing. Don't do it via the phone. If you have an issue on that involves a terminal or a carrier, you should involve both of them in the email process. We advocate that our members also copy in the local Federal Maritime Commission representative, so they're aware of the situation. And I think there are things that can be done, but at this point in time, the biggest thing I can say is document what's going on. Make sure that you have that archived, because I think that we all know that's the next step, is going to have to be formal complaints submitted to the Federal Maritime Commission outlining these unreasonable costs that are unduly affecting American businesses. And that is what it's going to take to change some of these. The FMC is very aware of what's going on. I think that that's been made very evident since we started this process in 2016 as part of the Fair Port Practices Coalition, led by some of the major importer organizations. But we're at a point now where we haven't seen it get better. We've seen it get worse. And those who have the prerequisite information to be able to take it to Federal Maritime Commission or be able to fight it, they're the ones that are going to get some sort of reprieve or may get more beneficial terms moving forward should policies not change. If you don't keep track of what you're doing, you don't document and archive it, if you don't utilize whatever technology available, you're going to be on the outside looking in. So make sure that you have a full picture of what's happening to you, especially if you're a small or medium-sized importer or exporter or trucking company. But I tell you, it's a lot more costly and administratively burdensome than it should be. We've got members who have hired full-time staff just to deal with this issue of documenting, asking for extensions of last free day, looking for appointments. But at the end of the day, I think the folks that are going to be best positioned are the ones that have done the precursory work. And I say that knowing it's not easy and it's not cheap, but we're looking for a long-term solution here. And there will be some short-term inconveniences. I guess that's the best way I can put it. I see some nods. So I guess we can move to the next question, Eric.
Hello. Yeah. I see a couple hands that Scott and Bill, your hands are up again, but I don't know if that was intentional. And then, but first I'll unmute Terry Bartle. It says you're self-muted, Terry.
Better? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can. Thank you, Terry.
Perfect. I just have a quick question. So this has been going on for a long time with foreign-owned carriers restricting supply and demand when it comes into the U.S. when it benefits them. Every stinking time they restrict supply when they need to add money to their coffers. Do you think there's a way to medicate, prescribe an annual capacity that needs to be in the water that would prevent them from creating the environments that induce and invite the ransom we enjoy called demurrage and per diem? It's ridiculous. Happens over and over again. Every time they want money, for whatever reason is, they restrict supply. How fortunate that COVID happened for them. My God. Just
Terry, Terry, you should read a fellow AgTC member of yours from somewhere else on the West Coast, because as usual we scrubbed the comments, but it appeared, I shared it, and it appeared in Freight Waves or American Shipper, whatever you call it, this morning. Very similar comment to yours. The fact is that when the carriers do that, they are, in my view, acting outside the confines of the agreements that they've filed at the commission. The penalty for that is the antitrust action and treble damages. And we've been talking about the millions of dollars of demurrage and detention charges.
Yep.
Treble damages would be pretty expensive. I think it also provides their self-enforcement at the Federal Maritime Commission. Now, there was some time ago when Mario Cordero was chairman. During that period, the ocean carriers were going to take advantage of congestion at the ports of LA and Long Beach during the labor negotiations. And so they were all going to get together. They filed an agreement to do this. And they were going to impose a congestion surcharge. This was at a time, think about it, the customers, you, Terry, you, Vince, were not able to move your cargo out of LA and Long Beach or out of Seattle, Tacoma, or Oakland because of the labor negotiations that slowed things down. So you were losing all your sales, all your profit, all your income. And the response of the ocean carriers is, let's tack on another $150 surcharge on cargo that wasn't being able to move. where is the connection between a service provider and their customer? And so at that point, the commission, and Mario Cordero can maybe attest to that, had a conversation with the ocean carriers, and the ocean carriers decided they would not charge that congestion surcharge. It shows that the commission has the tools. They need the will to do it. And so that's what we need, is a commission that's going to be closely aligned, not with the foreign flag ocean carriers, but with the US taxpayers who live here, who work here, because they can intervene. So the answer to that, Terry, is yeah, we can, if we've got some backbone at the commission, which I think we're very pleased to start seeing now is emerging. We're very pleased with the guidelines. We're pleased with what may be the next step. And Terry, we have some members of Congress from Oregon who are on the right committees of jurisdiction. Senator Wyden, Congressman Blumenauer, certainly Peter DeFazio, who's just a little bit south of where you are, Terry, chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. These are entities, individuals who have forest products exporters and others, and we have to mobilize them. And we'll need your help, Terry.
You got it. Hands in the air. Thank you.
Nobody messes with Terry.
Oh, baloney. Thank you.
Eric, do we have any other questions?
Yes. This is a comment question that came in from the audience. We recently have importers paying 50,000 of demurrages because of customs holds. Will these kind of cases be addressed as well? Customs took 3 weeks to complete an inspection.
Well, I'll let Vince answer this from that, but I would just say that unreasonable, that we keep going back to what's unreasonable.
Yeah. Thanks, Weston. So a couple of moving parts here, and I'm glad the question was asked. The Brokers Association has been monitoring certain types of exams that happen on dock automatically. I won't go into too much detail. And there is a backlog, and there seems to be a question as to whether, is it the agency, is it the terminal, my money's on the terminal. There's that happening. Then there are the trade holds. And I'll mention what I mentioned before, that the Port of Long Beach always had in their tariff a suspension, extension of free time when there were trade holds. Now it turns out the trade hold might have to be specific, and the Port of Los Angeles on the other side of the harbor did not have that in their tariff. And by the way, I think there, no exaggeration, 8 years of discussion with the PCC and the LA Customs brokers and the Port of LA on that issue. What you really saw in the spring, with all the personal protection equipment coming in and all much of that covered by the emergency use authorization, but much of it subject to EPA and FDA, a lot of new players jumped in. Their factories weren't registered. You saw a lot of PPE containers in LA Long Beach sitting on the pier for days, weeks. Illness would tell me that if I'm unable to pick up the container and it's not in my control, that there should be some sort of mitigation of free time, demurrage, and detention. So perhaps that's a discussion that can either be reopened or revisited, because there are, and interestingly enough, someone mentioned COVID. What we noticed during COVID, which was new, was there was never any confusion on the Long Beach side of the harbor. Everybody knew the tariff. If it was on a certain hold, terminals weren't even attempting not to extend the free time. But at the very beginning, it's gotten a lot better. But back in July, we even had to fight Long Beach terminals to extend the free time on trade holds. So what's interesting enough, I definitely think it should be on the table. I definitely think it should be a coordinated policy on both sides of the port. And I will mention, I wasn't going to mention this. I didn't want to sound like the boy who cried wolf, but I will mention it. Weston and Peter were throwing around a discussion about what happens if we go to the FMC and nothing really happens. I talk to customers about this every day, several times a day. And some of the cases are well into six figures, right? And I had an owner of a company tell me, you know, in the month of August, I had so many containers. Do you mean to tell me every one of these containers was handled properly, that they were all, none of them were eligible for free time? So the water in the market always seeks its own level. If, you know, 60,000, 40,000, 80,000, that's a lot of money. When you start going into the mid six figures, whenever it becomes cost effective to actually sue somebody, it's not a great place to be, right? And the amounts are growing so large that owners are looking like, well, this can't possibly be right, right? What is my recourse if the FMC, as Peter mentioned, if the FMC, is well-meaning, but perhaps they don't get everything done that they need to get done. So I do not believe that BCOs will continue to disperse this level of funds with no recourse.
Very true.
All right, Eric, any other questions?
Yes, indeed. Another question that came in via the chat is, could this problem be solved by containers just being put into gray pools and removing the control of the container from carrier hands?
I think it makes a lot of sense operationally. The only thing I would say is we have one of those on the chassis side, and while it has made things better, we're seeing that it has limitations as well. So I think whenever you have a situation where the equipment all looks the same, especially it would be helpful in our instance when you have the on hire, off hire, but anything that we can do to maximize dual transactions, to make the harbor more efficient. And I think that going with a gray container pool could help that, is something that needs to be looked at. And I think that's what I would say, is that if there's any idea that helps make this more efficient, helps reduce the amount of equipment needed, helps reduce the amount of drivers needed, helps reduce our carbon footprint and allow us to be the sustainably conscious business stewards that we know we can be and want to be, then we need to look at it.
You know, there's so much agriculture exports obviously start a long ways from a port. You may have for the importer distribution facilities in Moreno Valley or Riverside, but there's no agriculture coming even from that close. It's coming from at least 100 miles away, often 1,000 miles away, often 1,500 miles away. So to get a container to those places requires an ocean carrier to reposition. Now, while Hapag-Lloyd has been criticized for being one of the first to actually publicly state that they're not going to carry as much export cargo, they have to be given kudos, because over the last few years, Hapag-Lloyd has been willing to reposition containers in the upper Midwest, in places that are difficult to get to, North Dakota and Minnesota and so forth. And Hapag-Lloyd has been willing to do that. But when you're repositioning containers to rural areas, wouldn't it be easier if it was just gray containers? It didn't matter that a carrier could reposition a container from Houston to Kansas rather than from, and believe it or not, we've had to have reefer containers repositioned from New York, New Jersey to Kansas. If they were gray, it wouldn't matter. You could just pick the closest one. So a lot of benefits for it. Whether the carriers are ready to engage in that is another question.
Eric, next question.
There are no more questions. I did get a couple of requests for contact information. I took down your info, audience members, and I'll follow up with you after this call.
That'd be
Good.
fantastic. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I obviously want to thank Peter and Vince, our coalition partners, as well as all of the other coalition partners that couldn't be here today. I want to thank the members of the media for joining. This is a very important issue, not just for us, but for the entire industry and our entire economy and how commerce works in this great nation. And so I want to thank you for taking the time out to cover this serious and important issue. And I want to thank all of our guests. We had at one point 160 viewers watching this, which I think shows you how important that is in the middle of the day on a Monday when everybody's slammed to have this on, watch and listen. We're here to fight. We're going to continue to fight. And I really thank everybody for your support and for joining us today. With that, thank you. And Eric will follow up and make sure you all have contact information and be able to reach out. Have a great day.
Thank you, Weston.
Bye.